Welcome, everyone. This is Dr. Selucien Joseph for Center for Faith, Reason, and Dialogue. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce a new book entitled Black Assimilationism and Neoliberal Globalization, authored by Dr. Paul C. Mocombe, Dr. Paul Carol Tomlin, and Dr. Ericcson Mapfumo. So it's a pleasure to welcome the authors with us. This is the book launch event. So let me go over the format of this conversation. This is going to be a conversation. So first of all, I am going to introduce the book by reading the abstract so you guys have an understanding what the book is about. Then I will introduce the individual writer, and then each one will present for about 15 minutes or so about their respective chapter or their about the content of the book. Then you will have an opportunity to interact with the writers, asking questions or making comments and so forth. So this event is being recorded, so you will have an opportunity to share it with your friends, with your circles, and it will be published on the website of the Center for Faith, Reason, and Dialogue. It will be also published on our YouTube page as we're talking right now. It's live, right, on Facebook, and we'll be sharing the link with you. Okay. How we doing? Welcome, everybody.
What's going on, brother?
Well, it's a pleasure to see you guys. I know you guys are in the United Kingdom. Dr. Tomlin and Dr. Mapfumo, and Paul, you are in Florida, South Florida.
Yes, brother. Where you used to be.
Where I used to be. So we're dealing with three different time zones. And there's Central Time, that's my time in Texas, and Paul's time is Eastern Time, and then UK's time zone. 6 hours difference, is it about 6 hours?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, before I introduce the book, I want each one of you, okay, even before I introduce you, I'm going to introduce you. I want you to tell me, like in 30 seconds, tell the audience how this book come about. Shortly, very short. No more than a minute.
The book actually is an attack on postmodernism, post-structuralism as a theory, and trying to understand the role of Black folks within that process, within the objective world of neoliberalism. And Carol and I have been writing for almost 20 years. I've known Carol for about 20 years. Ericcson is new to the group. The brother is from Zimbabwe, and so we decided to collaborate. He did spend last year with us as he was researching his own book here in Florida. So it's trying to understand the role of Black folks in the theoretical processes that's taking place and the economic processes that are taking place. I know that's about a minute. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Good job, Paul. Good job. I'm so proud of you, Paul.
I'll do it in 30 seconds. I think the book came about as well because Paul and I had numerous discussions, and this is perhaps a theme of the book as well, an overarching theme. And we saw similarities between the UK, with the British Blacks in the UK, and the African Americans. So I think that helped to crystallize certainly Paul's theoretical position because of these overarching underlying similarities in two separate continents, as it were.
But Dr. Carroll, you do have an advantage. You used to live in the United States. You've
Yes,
taught
I
here
do.
for many years.
Yes,
So you know the Black experience
yes,
in the United States, also the Black experience in the UK.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. Ericcson, it's your turn.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so one of the things as well has been obviously the role of the Black Church, which obviously is an area that I like as well. So it's looking at obviously the role of the obviously the whites or the colonizers and how they have actually imposed their agenda on the Black people and so forth, and how that affects their identity, of which I think that's one of the things that is central to the argument. So basically it's that practical consciousness. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you so much. So let me introduce the writers right now. I'll begin with Dr. Paul C. Mocombe. He's a Haitian philosopher and sociologist. He's a former visiting professor of philosophy and sociology at the Bethune-Cookman University. He's currently serving as an assistant professor of philosophy uh, and sociology at West Virginia State University. He's the president and CEO of the Mocombian Foundation. He's interested in the application of his theories of I'm gonna slow down. This is a long one. His theories of phenomenological structuralism and consciousness field theory to contemporary issues such as the constitution of consciousness, race, class, and capitalism or globalization. Dr. Mocombe, who for 10 years has argued for the newly found fifth force of nature, which he posits is associated with consciousness and the multiverse. He's the author, one of the most, Dr. Mocombe is what I would say, maybe the most prolific Haitian author I know. I just don't know anyone else, at least in the United States, who has written more books or articles than Dr. Mocombe. So some of his works, selected works, include Haitian epistemology, identity, and ideology in Haiti, Jesus in the streets, race and class distinction within Black communities, language literacy in post-industrial societies. And I think that book didn't you co-author that book,
Yes, with
Dr.
Carol.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. And and then and Paul also has written about the literacy. There's the whole series called Mocombe's Reading Room series. Again, guys, this is just a brief uh note of his tremendous substantial publications. Reverend Dr. Carol Tomlin is an ordained minister and multi-award winning scholar who has a long and distinguished academic career teaching in universities, nationally, internationally. And she's currently a visiting fellow at the University of Leeds in the UK, United Kingdom. She's a former healthcare chaplain, the senior leader of Restoration Fellowship Ministries, and the founding principal of the Kingdom School of Theology that trains people for Christian ministry. She's the author of numerous academic publications, such as Preach It, Understanding African Caribbean Preaching. That's a classic. That's a classic. And she has co-authored books again with Dr. Paul Mocombe, for example, Language, Literacy, and Pedagogy in Post-Industrial Societies. One of her latest books is with Dr. Victoria Shurumi, Understanding and Managing Sophisticated and Everyday Racism. She's a gifted orator. Dr. Tomlin is often invited as a keynote speaker at national and international academic conferences and faith-based forums. Then we have Reverend Dr. Ericcson T. Mapfumo. Did I say your last name correctly, Doc? Is that
Yeah.
okay? I don't want to be like the Americans who always mess up people's name. I
Okay,
should
no,
know
no.
better.
Yeah.
So Reverend Dr. Mapfumo, he's a priest in the Church of England, a university chaplain. He's an academic and post-colonial scholar. He's the author of Black Clergy in the Church of England Towards a Sense of Belonging, published with Palgrave Macmillan. He's interested in issues to do with social justice and has a bias towards those on the margins of society. Those of you in the audience, like I said before, you will have an opportunity to have a conversation with the authors. So I would like to introduce the book at this time. Again, the title of the book is Black Assimilationism and Neoliberal Globalization. The book can be purchased on the Cambridge Scholars Publishing's website. And next week, it will be available on Amazon on any online bookstore. And the book just came out. Am I miss? Came out?
Yes.
Is it
Actually,
this
today.
Actually,
Today.
yes, that is true.
This copy today.
Yes. Yeah, the book just came out today. Okay, so I'm gonna read the abstract and then you get to hear from the individual author. The book argues that since their arrival on North American soil, the constitution of Black American identity has been the product of their relation to the means and mode of production within the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. As such, Black Americans, and this includes the so-called Black radical tradition, have never been agents in the constitution of their own identities. They have always been and remain reactionaries, pawns of capital, seeking to assimilate in the American social structure. Their assimilation takes place within the social practices of two dominant social class language games, the Black bourgeoisie and the underclass, that were historically constituted by different modes of production, such as agricultural, industrial, and post-industrial, and ideological paradises that includes the church and education on the other hand, and the streets, prisons, and the athletic and entertainment industries on the other hand, respectively, within the global capitalist racial class structure of inequality under American hegemony, which replaced African ideological apparatuses as found in Haiti, for example. Contemporarily, given both groups over representation and the ideological superstructures of the American empire, they anti no, can't find the word, antagonistically have become the bearers of ideological and linguistic domination for all Black youth the world over, which have tremendous consequences for their assimilation process. So, under the assimilationist imperatives of the Black bourgeoisie, the aim of this book is, well, their aim, not the book, is integration and assimilation along the lines of traditional white Protestant agents of the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism with an emphasis on bourgeois prosperity, the Black nuclear family, entrepreneurialism, and individualism. Conversely, the Black underclass seeks integration and assimilation through the pathologies of their structural differentiation within the Protestant ethics and the spirit of capitalism. Okay, I'll stop by now and I'll let Dr. Paul Mocombe go ahead and speak, Dr. Mocombe.
Thanks, Lou, for launching this for us. I'm happy to see you, brother. It's been a while. We missed you this past Christmas Eve.
Miss you too,
I know
guys.
it's late in the UK, so I'm going to be brief. What I'll do is I'll frame the structure of the book and then allow Ericcson and Dr. Tomlin to fill in and see similarities that are taking place, what I call Black assimilationism. The book is actually one of 5 that we're coming out with. I think Ericcson and I are doing 2, and the first 3 are with Carol and I. Basically, the book, to begin with, there's 5 points that the book highlights, and the series will also highlight these 5 points as well. Number 1, theoretically, the book is an attack on theoretical frameworks such as postmodernism and post-structuralism. This whole notion on emphasis and attack on objective truth. I'm trained as a logical metaphysical materialist, so I believe there's an objective world out there, and we don't make the world up as we please or as we wish, as some postmodern and post-truth thinkers want to suggest. There is an objective world, and we constitute and structure meaning and understanding in relation to that objective world. Even nature discriminates. So that's point 1. At that point, I reconceptualize consciousness to attack postmodernism and post-structuralism, because postmodernism and post-structuralism have an ontological understanding, and what ontology means is it has an understanding about the nature of being. For example, we include Jacques Derrida, Jacques Lacan as a psychoanalyst as part of this postmodern, post-structural tradition. But Jacques Lacan argues that the unconscious is structured like language. And if that's the case, then any meaning is possible and anything goes, because if the unconscious is structured as language, or what that implies is narratives govern the meanings and understanding that we recursively organize, which is absurd, because it implies that you can constitute and construct any meaning you want, regardless of the objective world that we experience. So that's the first point. The first point attacks the theoretical tradition of postmodernism and post-structuralism. And I do that by introducing what I call my theory of phenomenological structuralism and consciousness field theory. So all that says is, given its ontology in the sense that it's speculative, I argue that abductively, given the known knowledge we have about the physical world and about human beings, consciousness field theory is the logical origins of our consciousness. And I'm not going to go into the theory. I know there's people on Facebook. No one is in that. Not many people are academics, so I won't go into the physics of consciousness. But phenomenological structuralism assumes that there is a physics of consciousness, and this physics is tied to material reality. There is an objective material reality that we experience, and this is how we experience it. And consciousness is not something that arises from experience. I know a mentor of mine just recently died, Daniel Bennett. He argued that consciousness is an illusion. It really doesn't exist. I argue on the contrary. I argue that consciousness does exist. In fact, it's a fifth force of nature. Anyway, so that's the basis of understanding consciousness within the book. The second attack in contemporary social theory that the book takes on is the origins of neoliberalism. So how do we get from the consciousness field to the neoliberal model under American hegemony? How do we get that? Well, there's two positions. There's what's called systems theory and social integration. Usually people argue them apart. You look at origins of neoliberalism as capitalist relations of production. That's what we call the systemicity of we call that world systems theory. Is the dominant theory to understand the global neoliberal project under the American hegemony. Second position is looking at it from social integration. Many groups, social groups, women, they want to look at it from the position of social integration as opposed to looking at the constitution of neoliberalism from the position of systems theory. Why? Why do Blacks, women, gays, etc., want to look at it from the level of social integration as opposed to the level of system integration? Well, at the level of social integration, the minority group appears to have more agency as opposed to at the level of system integration where economists and those in power, those who control the material resource framework, they have more control in constituting the capitalist world system. So minority groups, they want to look at their everyday experiences. That's why the emphasis on postmodernism. They want to look at how do individual groups constitute life world separate from the systemicity that provides the social structure within which they recursively organize that world. Well, in my theory, system and social integration cannot be viewed mutually exclusive. They're inclusive. So for me, you have to look at the constitution of both the system, the capitalist world system, as it is contemporarily looked at under reproduced under neoliberalism, as well as how do individuals and individual groups within that system recursively organize and reproduce their world. Now, there's some theorists such as who attempt to look at the duality of it, all these structurationist theory, and that's the tradition I come out of. People like Habermas who want to argue that the system really doesn't have an impact on the lived world, the lived experiences of individuals, which is absurd because the media controls the narrative, the media controls how we view the world, our families, work life. So the system actually has infiltrated the lived world. So that's the second position. How do we go from the consciousness field to neoliberalism? And I argue we have to look at it from the position of Max Weber. The constitution of capitalism stems from the Protestant ethic, and then it becomes a system through capitalist relations of production that use institutions to interpolate. That's just a big word for name social agents and use ideologies and ideological apparatuses and language and communicative discourse to indoctrinate but integrate the individual into both the systemicity of capitalism as well as the social integration of capitalism. So that's the second point. You can't look at system and social integration separately. The systemicity of capitalism emerges from the social integration movement of the rise of Protestantism that gets reified as capitalist relations of production. The third position that the book highlights is what role then do Blacks play in that system? How did Blacks come into this system? So we look at how Blacks were what Althusser calls interpolated or introduced into the system. And we know the majority of Blacks were introduced into systemicity of the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism through slavery. Slavery is the first mode of production that introduced what would be called Black people into this system called capitalism or the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. And the fourth position is, as a result of that master-slave domination, Black relations have always been defined, or Black agency has always been defined by their relations to the means and mode of production. What does that mean? Since their introduction into the systemicity of the capitalism, the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism, it is Black relations to how that system is reproduced that determine their identity. So we go from agricultural slavery, in which you get this debate between what's called the adaptive vitality school in anthropology, between the Blacks maintain their Africanism when they were introduced to that, versus those who argue no, they didn't, because of the total institution, what Irving Goffman calls the total institution of slavery. It prevented Blacks from reproducing the alternative, their alternative institutions that they came from. Remember, and this is another point. This is another theoretical point that I argue that's very controversial in academia, because Western scholars, Western bourgeois scholars, want to argue that what differentiates Western societies from traditional African societies, primitive societies, the fact that, using Emile Durkheim's work, Western societies are organic solidarities, and primitive societies were mechanical solidarity, meaning there were no differentiation of work, no differentiation of thought in primitive societies, where differentiation of thought existed in capitalist society, Western society. I argue that's nonsense. All societies have been mechanical solidarity. Even Western society is a mechanical solidarity. There is no differentiation of thought or experience. And if you do have differentiations of thought and experience, you are marginalized, and to the point you can also be killed. So that's a very controversial point, and I've written several sociological papers on that issue. So to get back, Blacks have always, the identity and the consciousness and practical consciousness of Black people have always been determined by their relations to the means and mode of production, from agricultural slavery to industrial production to post-industrial production, to the point where theories regarding Black identity have focused on whether or not, in the beginning, under agricultural slavery, the Blacks maintain their Africanism. We call that the adaptive vitality school. Under industrial production, they argue no, they didn't. They reproduced the practices of whites, and where we find differentiation between whites and Blacks, that's a result of pathology of poverty, the pathological pathogenic school argue. Then in post-industrial society, there's this move into narratives, a search for meaning, a glorification of the self, intersectionality, homosexuality. All of that is a result of post-industrial economies and post-industrial finance capital, which the emphasis is no longer industrial production. On the contrary, we're looking at post-finance in the commodification of self-identity as commodities to generate surplus value for capital. So now it pays to be different, to identify as homosexual. In fact, you probably make more money in the academy if you're gay and Black, or gay and woman, than if you're straight, Black, etc. So that's the other issue. And the last and final issue, which constitute the book, is that Black people, for me, contemporarily are in danger, because what's happened, because Blacks in America, and as a result of the hegemony of America on a global scale, the Black American is used as an assimilative tool. Remember, the fight for Blacks in slavery, for the majority, especially the Black bourgeoisie, as E. Franklin Frazier points out, has been for social integration, what Nancy Frazier calls the equality of opportunity, recognition, and distribution. That has been the fight. As they became integrated post the 1950s, and this quest for equality of opportunity and recognition, as they became integrated into the systemicity of American society, Blacks now are used to integrate the Black diaspora in Africa into the class dynamics of global capitalism under American hegemony. So you get people like Kamala Harris, Colin Powell, Lloyd Austin, and Barack Obama, who have integrated white supremacy and serve as agents of white supremacy to integrate other blacks. Now, how does this integration operate on a global scale? Well, within capitalism, especially global capitalism under neoliberalism, the emphasis of the United States is to constitute and to maintain this hegemony, its post-industrial hegemony, in which the countries of the world are divided into what Emmanuel Wallerstein calls periphery, semi-periphery, and core nations. The core nations are Western Europe, America, and honorary whites such as Japan, the Australians. And their emphasis is on finance capital and glorification of the self and diversified consumerism. The periphery nations, their emphasis is to provide raw materials for the core nations, Western Europe, America, and honorary whites such as Japan and South Korea. Semi-periphery nations were at one point industrial-based societies such as Brazil, Russia, China, India. And the emphasis is for them to provide manufactured products for core nations. All of this is to operate using the American dollar as the means of exchange. Within that systemicity, blacks also play a role. Our role has been, especially in finance capital, entertainment, the entertainment industry, and athletics. So now, in the colonization of Africa, Africa is colonized to provide raw materials. The Black diaspora in the Caribbean and elsewhere, their emphasis is on tourism, light manufacturing, entertainment, and as well as the athletic industry. And what's happened is that blacks, the Black American in particular, have come to serve as role models for other blacks to basically are introduced into these avenues, athletics. So if you look at Africa, for example, because Africa has been de-agriculturalized, many of the young people are forced to the cities, and the emphasis is on athletics and entertainment as means to economic gain. Same thing in Jamaica and the Caribbean as well. So that becomes, and I'll never forget this, the late Reggie White, before he died, and I'll end in this and let the other scholars go. I have one more point I'll make it briefly. Reggie White, who played American football, before he passed away, he gave a speech in Congress in which he says he loves America because every group plays a role. Whites are your bankers, your business people. Your Asians are your mathematicians, engineers. And he says blacks are your entertainers and your athletes. That was the role we played. And it becomes problematic also because blacks now have been integrated into the system. And this is my last point, is that they are the bearers of ideological and linguistic domination. In fact, whites, just like the Roman Empire used the barbarians to represent their hegemony and their imperial agenda towards the end of the Roman Empire. Well, today we can see that's what America is using. It's using the black folks from the black bourgeoisie to promote their ideological and linguistic domination throughout the world. You have Linda Greenfield in the UN, who is supporting Zionist colony Israel. Racist Ukraine. Lloyd Austin is defending not a neo-Nazi fascist regime such as Ukraine. That's absurd. Obama, the so-called first black president of the United States, destroyed the most successful African country in Libya. This is absurd. Black folks now are representing and are the face of empire because they've been assimilated in the systemicity of the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. And this last point, when the war in Ukraine broke out, Joe Biden released Kamala Harris to the African countries to tell them not to side with Russia or trade with Russia, adopt the sanctions, etc. And she arrived in Ghana and told them, Western values. That means, gay marriage, etc. So as a Black woman, she became the face of empire in Africa to tell the Africans not to side with the Russians, who helped many of these Africans gain their independence to start with. So we see the absurdity of Black integration into the systemicity of the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. It produced white and Black skin imperialists and white supremacists. So I'll leave it at that. So that's the structure of the entire book in a nutshell. You're mute, brother.
Thank you, Dr. Mocombe, for this wonderful, amazing detailed explanation of what the authors collectively are trying to do in the book. And of course, we will have an opportunity to go back to Dr. Mocombe for further comments. So I would like to invite Dr. Tomlin to talk at this moment.
Yeah, there isn't really much to say because Dr. Mocombe did an excellent job in laying out the 5 positions that have been outlined in the book. You're going to have to forgive me because my brain is shutting down, but as I get talking, I'm sure it will come back up again. What struck me as we were discussing the themes of the book were the striking parallels. And this is why I think this whole idea that we're dealing with a system is critical to our understanding of the Black experience. And in terms of the African American hegemony, and as I thought about the UK and what was happening in the UK, so let me give you an example, and this has been outlined in the book. You have a high percentage of single parent mothers as single parents, particularly among the Caribbean population in the UK, parallels the African Americans. The African population that is emerging in terms of single parenting, but for different reasons. Most of the men, or some of them rather, sorry, tend to go back home because of a lack of economic opportunities that match their academic experience. So, but it's interesting that even among the African population, there is still the single parenting for different reasons that are emerging. The other similarity was in terms of the bling bling culture, again, that you've outlined or we've outlined in the book. What is interesting in the UK is Blackness is synonymous with the ghettoization, which is code for Black culture and Blackness. So again, very similar to the US. The difference is, however, whereas in the US you have a Black bourgeoisie, that's been well established. In the UK, your African population forms that Black bourgeoisie rather than the Caribbean population, because the African population have been here for a number of years, and when they came in the even 19th century up until the 21st century, they came to pursue education, and more recently they came to as professional migrants, in contrast to the Caribbean population who came after the post-war period to help to rebuild the country. And you know, we talk about obviously colonization and the means of production and the spirit of capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
They saw the UK as a mother country. So they came with a particular mindset, and they were absorbed into the working class community. So in the UK context, among the Caribbean population, and Paul Gilroy actually says this, the Caribbean population lost their separate identities. They were absorbed into the white working class community. And even now, working classness is in some ways a part of the Black Caribbean matrix and the ways in which they construct their identity, which again is very interesting. So, but in terms of even entertainment, music, athletics, exactly similar parallels in the UK, which we haven't recorded this in the book. There is music called grime. Have you heard of that? Grime. Okay, that's the Black British version. There's also something called garage. I pronounced as garage and my students corrected me. Again, that's the Black British music creation, but even the word grime. And obviously there's a huge kind of importation of rap music as well. So you've got the rap hip hop culture, which is very strong in the UK as it is in the Caribbean and Africa, but in the UK, it's very strong. The UK is a very unique place in that you have the Caribbean population, you have the South American Black population, you have obviously those like me who were born in the UK, and you've got a few Americans. So the UK is really quite an interesting place to test out your hypotheses, Paul. And I think the predictions that we have concluded are already here in the UK. That whole integration desire, I think, is problematic within the UK because you have a class dimension. So the UK is much more nuanced in terms of the class dimension, and class works in more complex ways compared to the US. But again, prison population overloaded with Black men. In fact, one study suggested that 25% of youth offenders were actually young Black men. That's not in terms of the percentage, that's just in terms of the raw figure. And yet the Black population totally comprising the African and Caribbean is only 3%. So it's even worse in the UK, the prison population. Apparently, Martin Glynn's study has highlighted that the Black British prison population is worse than the US.
Wow.
Yes, wow, indeed. Certainly for youth offending, what you call juvenile, youth offending, 25% in the UK. And in terms of, again, single parenting, in fact, one study, 60% of Black women in the UK, it's higher than the US, have never ever been married. is higher. And in terms of children born out of wedlock, it's higher because I've seen the figures. It's higher in the UK amongst the Caribbean population because remember, in slavery in the US, many people were married that had the two-parent family. Conversely, in the Caribbean, certainly among the Jamaican population, many people were not married. The Windrush generation, those that were the first generation, came here, came in the 40s and 50s, and they were forced to get married because that was the cultural climate at the time. And when the permissive society took place, they went back as opposed to the familiar patterns, family structures of the Caribbean. So it's all fascinating, and I'll leave it at that. Sorry.
You're muted, Paul.
You're muted, Dr. Paul.
No, I said I had a question for you, but we'll after Ericcson, I'll ask. Sorry.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to say, to comment about. I mean, about Dr. Carroll's presentation, especially the stats. As I was reading this book, I was overwhelmed, and to my surprise, the Black experience in the US is so similar when it comes, for example, to single female-headed households, you know, in the UK and also in the US, mass incarceration, like you mentioned, Dr. Tomlin. Anyway, I'll leave that for later. Okay, Dr. Mapfumo, it's my pleasure to introduce you. Please go ahead and inform us, educate us, instruct us.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah. So I think a lot of the things have been said, but obviously I will talk a little bit of some of the things or some of the discussions, and also how they apply to Africans or maybe the Black people. So one of the things is what we've been asking also is how do the African people find themselves in a global world? And this also, I mean, as a clergyman, has been interesting for me in terms of how that idea of identity, like as we were saying, is influenced by a number of factors. And for a long time, I think in the UK, especially in theological setting and others, there's that idea where people talk mostly about race and so forth. And I think part of what has been coming through, or I suppose the reflection, is that actually there's an issue I think we need to consider regarding class. And as Dr. Carroll was saying also, that obviously is a little bit complex in the UK. So I think there's that idea of a caste, what do you call it? Color caste system in general. So which means that actually besides race, we are dealing with a lot of things here in terms of obviously that identity, because the African is trying to find himself in the world or in the UK, but making reference to the way the society is describing him or her, if you see what I mean. So I think that is creating a problem, especially also even in the religious sphere, because who is the Black clergy? What influences, or what are the influences that has happened to him? So you'll find that those idea of slavery, especially that are brought in the book, they refer to the obviously the history, which obviously has been spoken about, and how that might actually be affecting what is happening now. But sometimes in our churches or in our society, sometimes we forget those kind of issues and we say, oh, this happened in the past, people should move on. But actually we're saying that actually it might be problematic because they are sort of like these big ideas that we need to consider, and how it might actually be influencing, especially influencing things of sort of like influencing ideas of identity and so forth. And coming back to that idea of, let's say, the family in general, we notice that the family itself in society has been, obviously, I think, like as written in the book, that actually during slavery, I mean, obviously there were stronger families than what we find now. So in a way, it means that the security that people had, the security in terms of believing in the family and so forth, we might find that actually their identity was to some extent better than than now, when we see actually that we don't know what people, I think it's just it's a comment. Yeah. So yes, so it's especially, for example, that idea which is in the book, when people obviously jump the broom, like in Shona, obviously we say kunzenga mtswairo. It was one way of obviously legalizing marriages, and nowadays people don't even want to get married. Obviously the values, like as Paul was saying, the values of the white society, and obviously trying to disintegrate families, has been sadly being promoted, but at the same time affecting other sort of functions of society. So yeah, so basically these are some of the things that have been obviously we've been discussing, and obviously the conversation it continues to develop, especially in terms of obviously exploring belonging and so forth. And some of the things as well, maybe which was sort of like indicated, is to some extent, as an African, I believe that there's a stolen legacy of of the past and so forth. But yeah, but I think I'll end there, just as a reflection of identity. Yeah, thank you.
Well, very good. I thank you for all three of you for this great and detailed presentation on the subject matter. Before the Paul did say he has a question for Dr. Carroll. However, before I take Paul's question, Marie Nadine Pierre, would a comment plus a question? I want to invite you to listen to her comment. She wrote, I want to say that the marriages between enslaved blacks or those who jumped the broom wasn't always legal. The practice was discouraged. I think that a very few percentage of enslaved people were allowed to stay together as a nuclear family unit. One book that I'm thinking about right now, but which is over 30 years old, is Albert Gutman's The Black Family in Slavery and Freedom. My question is, regarding the prevalence of Black descendants of enslaved people, single mother household, what is the role of the state in the family? How often are children taken away from these single mothers? I've seen some documentaries about the foster care system in the UK, and it hurts Blacks of all ethnicities. Okay, so
Carol,
anything?
you want to tackle that?
Yeah, okay. Let me tackle the one
Do
in
you
the
mind if I piggyback off Maria's question, because this is tied into what she's saying? In this sense, To what extent, once you answer her question, do Blacks in the UK celebrate contemporarily the non-traditional family, such as being single, being in gay relationships, and other alternative, being in transgender, quote unquote, families? Because in America, that's celebrated. That, that's the new diversified consumerism. So that was my question, and it piggybacks off Maria's question.
Right, okay, good. I'll answer the last bit of Marie's question in terms of the foster care system, but let me, if that's okay, Paul, but let me address what you have just said in terms of, now you see my brain shutting down, you're gonna have to remind me. What did you say about what was your question to me?
No, to what extent are Black
yeah, her question?
No, Paul's question first.
Paul's question, okay.
Oh, no, to what extent now are non-nuclear families celebrated in the UK as it is in the US by law, in fact, by law in the US?
Yeah. A similar pattern is emerging. Interestingly, I was speaking to I think she's Gen Z or Z as you pronounce it. And she said that the gay agenda among Black young people is definitely emerging. There are quite a few lesbians and homosexuals, right in my locality, quite a number apparently. Whereas in previous years, it was really disdained. And even now, to some extent, you have the sacred or church context, which, unlike in America, which embraces homosexuality, certainly the Pentecostal churches, the Anglican and Church of England, that's different. But the Pentecostal churches, what's called Black majority churches in the UK, both African and Caribbean, they don't embrace the non-traditional family setup. They embrace the nuclear family because they tend to be more traditional and in terms of their view of the Bible. And so, unlike in America, I've noticed that there is an emerging, even among the Pentecostals, an emerging acceptance of the non-traditional family setup. But interestingly, in the UK, certainly, and again, there's a distinction between African and Caribbean. In the African context, and again, Ericcson, Dr. Mapfumo can bear me out here, there is a strong culture of marriage, an extremely strong culture of marriage and the traditional family and extended family setup. In the Caribbean context, single parent family household is quite the norm and not the exception. So there's a difference. So non-traditional in that sense is accepted, certainly among the Caribbean. The gay family structure is not as accepted, certainly within the Pentecostal sacred context. It's not accepted. But for evangelical...
Got Maria's question.
Marie's question?
Yes.
About the role of the state.
Repeat it? Yeah. Let me repeat her question. She writes, regarding the prevalence of Black single mother households, what is the role of the state and the family? how often are children taken away from these single mothers?
Well, isn't that, Paul, the first bit about how often are children taken away in
Mhm.
terms of descendants of enslaved people? What is the role of the state? Oh, is that UK context or American
I,
context?
uh, she doesn't say. Maybe she's referring to.
Okay.
Oh, because she also wrote. I've seen some documentaries about the foster care system in the US. I'm in the UK.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
get it. Okay,
Okay.
within in the context of the UK, right? This you're gonna have to bear with me, but I'm gonna try
Sure.
and be number one. When the, let's say, West Africans came to the UK in the 50s, it was mainly the men that came, the women followed. Because they came specifically to study, a lot of their children were fostered out to white families who lived in the south of the country. Yeah. And when they were fostered, and this system actually didn't end, or this practice, and I was very surprised, up until about 2003, from the 1940s to 2003. Unfortunately, a few of the children were adopted by white families, and some of the Nigerians, Ghanaians, never saw their children again. This is all documented, by the way. So that, again, the culture of, I'm going to say, physical punishment in the child rearing practices among certainly the Caribbean population has also led to their children being fostered, because
Hmm.
the state doesn't agree with the methods of discipline.
If I may piggyback off Dr. Tomlin for Maria's book in the US, this is the theoretical debate that we have in academia between this notion of system and life world. To what extent does the systemicity, law, language, communicative discourse, media infiltrate our ability to constitute our own meanings and values? This is what we call the structure agency debate in the social sciences. People like Habermas want to argue that because the life world, the world where we constitute meaning through our actions, through our everyday lives, lived experiences, is somehow shielded from the systemicity of the capitalist system. And that's not the case. It's clearly not the case, especially when you're dealing with the Black experience. Since slavery, the Black experience has been dominated by total institutions, the laws. Even now, and this is where the Afro pessimists get it right, Black people contemporarily, the Black experience has been is synonymous with uh, the whole intersectional identity politics. In fact, we are the poster children for identity politics. Every commercial is either a brown or a Black face representing transgenderism, lesbianism, homosexuality, etc. And that is projected globally. And that global projection is problematic because now with the whole Trump movement and this right wing movement that is happening not only in America but globally in the UK and elsewhere, many people are reacting to this whole intersectional and identity politics as foreign to Western liberalism and is introduced by the other. The other is introducing these intersectional and identity politics, etc., which is absurd. It is the logical it is the logical unfolding of Western liberalism. And this is the problem that I have with the Black Atlantic, the theories about the Black Atlantic or Black modernity. It's absurd. it's just problematic for us because now we're the poster children for intersectionality and identity politics that's projected around the world, and that's very problematic.
You say so, if I may ask this question, Chair, would you say, Dr. Mocombe, that that is leading to the demise of the Black family?
Oh, absolutely, without a doubt, because now we're celebrating the quote unquote diversity. Just on Easter Sunday, here, and I'm not religious, but Easter Sunday, Joe Biden announced transgenderism as Transgender Day or whatever. But Black people have become the poster children, and that is destroying now. That is destroying the quote unquote Black nuclear family. And I'm gonna use an anecdotal evidence. I went to get my wife a gift at a Black mall. Well, it's a mall that's in the Black community here. And every couple at the mall was a lesbian couple. Every Black couple was a lesbian couple. And so it goes back also to the theoretical positions that we adopt. This notion of narratives and meta narratives and postmodern. I just reviewed a book on Haitian Vodou in which the theorist is trying to impose homosexuality on Vodou itself as though it's commonplace, and they don't understand Vodou is its own system, and it says that yes, we recognize that homosexuality occurs in human nature, but it's not promoted by the systemicity of Vodou. Vodou doesn't promote homosexuality to children, etc. That's absurd. But the scholar, which is a Nigerian scholar, looking once again for identity in the Black experience, tried to identify herself in Vodou because, she noticed that in Vodou, homosexuals aren't murdered, they're not stoned, they're not killed. No, that's not acceptable in Vodou. But it doesn't mean that we promote it as a practice. So this is why it's very important, because now these notions of postmodernism, post-structuralism, meta-narratives, we're imposing lies on structure. It doesn't make any sense. And we in academia are responsible for that because we're not critiquing. It's as though because the West has encountered a problem with truth, or the Kantian ability to know truth, which Kant dismisses, to know the thing in itself. Because of that critique, it's as though they've abandoned this notion for truth and have focused on every meta-narrative. Now in academia, they said we can't refer to pederasts or pedophiles as pedophiles. They're the lovers of children. It's absurd. It's just absurd. It's a nihilism that's impacting Western liberalism, which is a logical conclusion of Western liberalism anyway.
But I do have a question for all of you. I don't know if Dr. Mapfumo wants, to comment before I ask the question.
Yeah, no, not really. Yeah, yeah. I suppose one of the other things I think I'd wanted to talk about, obviously, the impact of the attack on the Black family. Obviously, is resulting in mental health issues, especially in some of the children and so forth. So those are some of the things. Yeah, and also to say, I think also the breakdown is also being influenced to some extent with the mode of production, because it's a challenge for most men, especially in the UK and so forth, to get a decent job. So you find that females have got more earning power and so forth. Yeah, so that's it.
Yeah, thank you. I have a twofold question for all three of you. Do you see the rise, for example, the rise of the LGBTQ movement? For example, you have provided some stats that are, how do I put it? Very enlightening. Do you see the rise of the LGBTQ movement in the Black community in the United States, as well in the Black community in the US, as a threat, as a moral threat to the nuclear family, or what we call the traditional family, or, as society, as sociologists tell us, as society evolves, people also evolve. They want more freedom. They want more agency. They want more autonomy. How do we, you know? It seems to me, all of you were making a moral argument from that perspective. Am I reading you correctly?
Oh,
Are you want to say something before I go?
I said you first.
Oh. I'm not making a moral argument. Yes, the rise of that movement is a threat to Black folks. Let's be honest here. Especially in America, post the Black Power movement in America, the Black community lost. They were destroyed with COINTELPRO. They were systematically destroyed. Black men were systematically incarcerated. And this agenda, and I don't care what anybody on the left has to say, because the world is so structured, the world itself, and this is a scientific as opposed to a moral position, even though there is morality in science. But for me, you are not allowed to impose any meaning you want onto the world, even though postmodernism and post-structuralism tells us so. I could suggest that I can fly, but if I go jump off the cliff, there are consequences for the meanings we impose on reality. This capitalist system that we're imposing on reality, we are seeing the denouement of this system and the problem it's causing. And the problem is climate change, pollution, the destruction of the material resource framework. So the earth itself is telling us this system cannot go on, no matter how the West is trying to reproduce the system. Eventually, it's going to reach its contradiction. It's going to destroy the environment and us and everything else on it. Same thing with the LGBTQ. They are imposing, the power elites, the globalist elites are imposing a view about family structure that is contrary to nature itself. I was listening to a scholar who was critiquing Russian society because they were against the whole LGBTQ movement, and he said on in the media, there is no men, there is no women. So they're imposing a narrative onto us that makes us delusional. Forget about the reality we see, but assume the ideology of the system that we put in place, and then we can recursively organize and reproduce our lives. That's absurd. So we are not allowed. Nature itself precludes us from preventing values and meanings, any old value and meaning onto the world, because we deal with the consequences of imposing those meanings and value. Now, some of these consequences are minuscule, but others are tremendously problematic. Look what we're doing to young Black men in America. We're producing a bunch of sissified little boys who are walking around like women. It's insane. We're prescribing medication to children to say that they can change their sex. This goes against any scientific theory about how do we as human beings constitute our consciousness and our meaning. We learn Albert Bandera, cognitive psychology. We learn by watching adults and others around us. That's how so now we're saying, well, there's no meaning. You can do whatever you want to. If you're a little child whose brain has not developed, you can take hormonal medication to become a woman. It's insane. We're imposing value. Now, that may appear to be moral because of past tradition, but it's also scientific. In Western liberalism, we want to deny the scientism for morality and then argue, oh, well, we can't make that argument. In fact, science is meaningless. There's no science. In fact, what does postmodernism, post-structuralism do? It attacks science itself, which is absurd. But that's so it's not a moral issue, it's also a scientific issue as well. So go ahead, Carol and Ericcson.
Oh, yeah, fantastic. Not much that I have to add. I mean, the X and the Y says it all scientifically. And I come at this whole area as well, certainly from a biblical framework as a minister of the gospel. And it's interesting that the Bible lays out a clear household code in Pauline theology, which blacks that have, even in America, have subscribed to. But as a result of what I call Western imperialism, and it's white male Western imperialism, unfortunately, as you've said, Paul, Black men have become the poster child of the LGBTQ. And Blackness now is synonymous with the gay agenda and the woke agenda, which is very interesting. And as you said, the reasons why the right are railing against it. And we, unfortunately, are not agents. We haven't got our own agency in these Western democracy. And our family structures have crumbled significantly. And as you said, Paul, there is a system. And if there is truth, which is objective, there is an ontological way of being. And if we deviate from that for some liberal notion of personhood and of individual rights, mass incarceration, mental health, we are, unfortunately, have suffered the dire consequences of imbibing that particular script. In the West, your Asians are not the poster child.
They don't want a jihad.
Okay. But even those who are Hindus and Sikhs from that kind of background, the Indians, because that's what we call Asians in the UK, they are not the poster child. The Chinese are not the poster child. The group that is suffering on every single level is the poster child, and whose family structure has diminished. And the role of the father, who's supposed to be the head. And I know people want to contest that and contend that, but in every society, you talked about a system, Paul, which we've written about in the book. I rest my case.
Carol and Ericcson, I want to interject since Carol brought up an interesting point. Because this notion of LGBTQ that Lou brings up is also being undermined in the Black churches as well in America. I don't know if that's in the UK. I know, Ericcson, you're dealing with the crazy white people in the Anglican church, but in America, even the Pentecostals now are starting to interject LGBTQ interpretations into the gospel itself, where you in New Jersey you have a gay Pentecostal couple running the church, which seems oxymoronic. But is that the case in the UK? Is it starting to interject into the church as well? Ericcson and Carol?
Let Ericcson answer from the Church of England Anglican position.
Yeah, I think it's a these are sort of like complex questions. as you know. Yeah, so maybe obviously beginning to answer Lou's question and then obviously Paul's. I think one of the things as well is that these are big ideas, and also is trying to address the questions that obviously the academy is bringing, or attacking the family and so forth. But also from a pastoral point of view, it becomes obviously essential to be sensitive, to realize that obviously it's more complicated than that, in the sense that some people might, having been influenced from different spheres, and then they find themselves in those categories. But I think one of the things is that we then need to be sensitive, but yeah, so I think more or less, I think what I'm trying to say is that, especially for Africans and other people, the way they grew up and so forth, their own identity or ontology was framed in a different way. And I think what we're saying is that it could be that they are being imposed, or some other different ways of knowing are sort of like being imposed on them. So I think it's just highlighting that these are the issues that we need to look at. And also one of the things is also maybe that sometimes it has now become more political. So in terms of the churches, I think, like as Carol was saying, it is it is complicated, especially, of course, it's difficult for me to speak for the Church of England, because obviously it's the national church. I think there's a guideline which the church has produced, which is available on the website. But I think one of the things, I think the summary basically is that an individual is an individual, and one of the things is that whatever that they might encounter, we need also to be sensitive, especially from a minister point of view. However, like we're in an academic space, so we're looking at obviously what are those arguments that people are bringing, and are those arguments rational? Because you can't obviously tell us one thing and then tomorrow it changes, and so forth. So we then will try to see what changed, what happened, and so forth. Because obviously the history of, for example, homosexuality, you know that it was illegal in the past. It was seen as unnatural. But we see that obviously with society, things have changed. So I think it's those kind of ideas. What we're trying to highlight is that what is causing this change? Is it scientific, or of which I think Paul is highlighting that I suppose there are questions to ask and so forth, and also from the African point of view, in terms of most Africans countries, even in the Anglican, which is the wider church, they are finding this an issue to struggle, and I think they've been vocal to say it's not part of what they want to say. So I think for me personally, I think it becomes, obviously I can only speak for myself. It's obviously an issue which obviously I'm still praying about, and trying to find out what might be the best solution, because whatever people decide, I mean, as a minister, is to walk alongside them. I think that's that's the challenge. Yeah, and I suppose I love everyone. I think, just to be clear, whatever that they, but also willing to listen to their point of view. And if I disagree, it doesn't mean that obviously we are not friends, or we won't drink cup of tea together. So yeah, so basically, I think that's what I can say regarding this issue. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, before we bring this to a close, Dr. Carol has her hand raised. And I also believe, oh, I thought Marie has another question. Oh, okay. But and then I will have a question for all of you before we bring this to an end. All right, Carol?
Just to really cement the discussion, because it's an important one on the gay agenda, and certainly pastorally, what should be our approach. And actually, Paul, it was you who said this. You can come as you are, and as Christians, love is who we are because God is love, and God loves everyone. Now, I think it depends on how we see the gay agenda. If we see the gay agenda as sin, like adultery or pedophilia, we don't say to the adulterer, you can remain in your adulterous practices. So we embrace them and we walk them through, we love them and we nurture them and we give them pastoral counseling and advice. But we would never say to an adulterer, it's okay to remain in your adulterous practices. So I think the issue is also about objective truth, objective morality, and the science. So those three things then determine our ontological view of the construction of the family, and that then informs our pastoral model and approach, and how we can then provide appropriate counsel for individuals in lifestyles that may be incompatible with the traditional view. And it's within that framework, I think, certainly as church people, that we have to navigate and negotiate, and at the same time be very clear as to what our stance is. And I think that's the issue. So I just felt I had to say that. And the problem I think that the church has had, however, is that there has been gay bashing, quote unquote, and in the past there has been a lack of love, and there has been discriminatory practices in terms of what constitutes sin. So your pastor that has been sleeping with half the members, sometimes that's more accepted than someone in a lifestyle that you deem a sin. And I think clarity, clear boundaries, objectivity, objective truth is important in the discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Carol. Ishmael de Kirby from Facebook thank you guys for having such an important discussion that really matter today broadly and for our Black community in particular. Now, before we bring this conversation to a close, I do have a question. I want to return to the notion of the disintegration of the Black family in the United States, the Black family in the UK. As you guys have proven in your research, your excellent research, your excellent book, I think I want to address this question to a priest, also to a pastor, not you, Paul. You can comment later, but I do want, because this question pertains more to them as ministers. What is the role of the church? What is the role of the church to help improve the Black condition in the United States and in the UK? What could the church do? What the church should do to support those families, to give them a new life, to transform their living conditions?
Dr. Mapfumo first. 。
Yeah, it's quite a I suppose a difficult question, I suppose, for me with the institution that I'm part of. But I think I will try the best to explain. So part of the church more generally, I think also what I might have forgotten to say is that there is also like the Zimbabwean Anglicans that I'm part of, which is obviously a group of Zimbabweans, and I also work with other Black majority churches, fellowship with them. I grew up in an African Pentecostal and so forth. So one of the things I think the church has a role to educate and to educate everyone, especially the Black community, on actually finding out what is their identity. What is their identity and how that identity was shaped, and what are some of the things that might threaten that identity. But I think personally, I believe that the church should become a place where that idea of family is to be upheld, and ways of trying to yeah, I suppose to theorize, I think that idea of family, but also to realize that, of course, we as a family, we might welcome others who might be different from us, and so forth. But I think I'm saying it's a difficult question because I think is that kind of situation whereby if, especially in the UK, if you're leading, or I suppose if there are different people with different views, it becomes difficult in terms of what you can do. But I think the most important thing, so for example, one of the things, I suppose, speaking for myself as an African, is that I always see things with African eyes, so to speak. So I won't try to be what I'm not. I won't try to be a European. I think that's the kind of thing. So regardless of my associations, I'll try to be myself. And I think congregation members and everyone who sees, if they can see that I am who I'm trying to be, then the idea of the church, or the Black church, then is to try and promote those values that are the African values or Black values from the beginning. For example, I'll get maybe just to say, um, I don't know if everyone agrees who's listening, but I think is that idea that I believe that there is African view of women and a Western view of women, and so forth. So I think for me, obviously, I could learn something from the Western views, but I think what I grew up with is obviously the African views. So I think it's when we sit at the table to discuss those and to find out where we differ and what we actually bring. So there should be an equal sharing of our knowledge system. So for example, in the Church of England, obviously there's still some research going on in terms of actually finding out how that Black people can be better supported, because obviously there could be a realization that some of the things might not have happened as planned, or as people hope for. So I think it is still a work in progress and so forth. But also in terms of the Black church, most of them obviously are trying to find out who they are, because sometimes they might have copied some of the things that they don't understand, so to speak. Yeah. So it's a difficult question, but yeah, but I don't know if you can come back to me if you want me to say some more. But I think I'm trying to be to answer it as best as I can. But it is a difficult question. because of the, but I would say I think it's those financial aspects, the modes of production, because even if the black church says things, sometimes they are on the margins. so sometimes they are not participating in the discourses, which obviously affects them. But however, that doesn't mean that they have to lack agency. They can still do what they can where they are, and try to uphold the ideas of family. So basically, I think I'll stop there for now for Carol. Yeah, thank
you. Thank you, Dr. Mapfumo. It's a very good question. And I was thinking of, let me tell you what I do in my church, that might help. We promote a kingdom model of the family. What do I mean by a kingdom model? In fact, there's a scholar, New Testament scholar, that says that one should embrace one's identity in terms of one's destiny in Christ, not one's past in Adam. So in other words, in all systems, in African and European systems, there are flaws, there are challenges in terms of gendered relationships. It's not either or for me, because all kind of earthly cultures and systems are problematic. And I suppose, for you, Dr. Mapfumo, you, as you said, you construct the world through West African eyes. Well, I was born in the UK of Caribbean heritage, and I wasn't brought up in Africa. So again, even in terms culturally, my identity is, multiplicity, you could argue. So a kingdom paradigm for me is appropriate whether you're a Westerner or an African, if we're talking about it certainly from a Christian point of view. Now, that's not to say that we can't learn from the West or that we can't learn from Africa, but I don't agree that all things Black or African is correct, or all things Western is correct. And I'm saying that because too often these binary positions fixate us in a way of doing life that isn't always conducive. So what do we do to promote? We have conferences, seminars, which directly target at the family. So, for example, we have a biannual Back to the Garden of Eden family enrichment conference, and our soul ties. DrPaul, you've seen our soul ties. So we have, interestingly, quite a strong inclination in my own church, which is an independent church, which deals with the family, deals with relationships. So it's about education, and the family unit, certainly in the diaspora, has been disrupted. How can there be a resurgence of a strong family? It's through education. Men and women. We've got a lot of empowering women's group, and we do need that, but I want to see empowering men's group. So that, Black men can navigate their role. I'm tired, and I've put this on my Facebook page. I'm quite tired of the mantra or the mythology of the strong Black woman. You know, Michelle Wallace had it right. The myth of the strong Black woman, it's a myth. And that really needs to be debunked, that myth, because we have to work together. And the Western model doesn't always work, and neither does the African, given the context that we're dealing with.
Mm.
Yeah, within the UK, you know, again, like America, the divorce rates is quite high, certainly for the Caribbean population, and there is emerging literature about the African family. We look at the gang culture. It used to be Caribbean, second generation, third generation. Now, you know, it's mainly African, certainly in London, because they're the huge demographics. So there's an issue with the family, fatherlessness, the role of the father. You know, this nonsense, I can do without a man. No, you cannot. Not when you're raising boy children or even girls. That's why the Bible talks about a head. And you need a neck, but you need a head. And unfortunately, our families are headless. I know that's a strong statement, but I'll leave it at that. I'm beginning to sound like you, Paul. We talk too much. But I'm quite passionate about this, as you know. You know, you can't have half of your men locked up, then the women taking responsibility, then, you know, the men, you know, this discourse, oh, the women are this, the women are that, then, you know, you're going to other ethnic groups. The devil is a liar. Now I'm sounding like I'm back into, no, we have to come together to educate and to do something very different. But your practical field of consciousness, Paul, is a starting point.
Very good. Okay. We come to a close, but before I close, I just want to read a comment from Marie. She states, the state penalizes single mothers by depriving them of necessary resources. Well, it's 6:56 in its last word.
7:50.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's your time, brother. My
That's
bad.
my time. So 7:56. We have,
in the morning.
yes. So we have 4 minutes left. Any last comment, final comment, or before we bring this to a close?
I just want to piggyback, just one final comment from me. Maria brought up the point about, and I have a great paper that just came out on the Black church and the whole notion, because there's this notion that the Black church played a progressive role in slavery and liberating Black folks. And we all know that historically that's not the case, but there's a revisionist history that's taking place among contemporary postmodern and post-structural theory. Piggyback off Carol, the thing about the Black church that was so significant is the fact that it had and has the potential to structure the ontology by which we reproduce our lives in the world. Because once you control the ontology, you control everything else. And this is what the West has had on us. They've controlled 5 systems that constitute society or any structure. They've controlled the language, they've controlled the mode of production, they've controlled the ideology, they've controlled the ideological apparatuses and the communicative discourse. And one of the institutions coming out of slavery that we were able to gain control of was the Black church, But instead of many of us reproducing it or correcting it from the institutional bastardization that it underwent via the Europeans and slavery, etc., we adopted it and recursively reorganized it and not challenged it. I'm not saying all the Black churches did that, but the majority of them did. And I think we need to do just that. We have to constitute our own language system, our own communicative discourse, our own ideologies, ideological apparatuses, and mode of production based on a true ontology in relation to the known facts as we know them contemporarily. And the church can play that role by reconceptualizing some of the ideologies that they inherited from slavery. And we in academia can start to do that by demystifying and demythologizing some of the theories that come out of the Western tradition, which is just pathetic and absurd, but we celebrate them because it's coming from the West or our Western values. And so we need to, things aren't as complicated as they may seem, especially if you hold on to the notion of truth or a truth, because we have perspective and there's the truth and there's a difference. And I think a lot of people are starting to confuse the two, but I'll end on that.
Sorry, Marie asked a question. Oh, made a statement. I don't think that we should be insisting that the nuclear family structure is the best for Black people. Are you saying the extended family system is the best? Maybe you could write out the question.
Or the polygamous family.
Well, that's not going to happen. Right, so you can forget that one.
It worked for a while for us.
But remember, and there's another issue as well, obviously, that, lots of things worked in, perhaps you could say, quote unquote, traditional, societies. But, it's an interesting state. So,
okay.
Yes, okay, fine, okay.
Did you want to say something as Dr. Tomlin?
She's answered the question.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry. I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, sorry. That's my problem. Sorry.
Okay.
That being controversial, and I'll end on here. My problem is that, and I've been brought up in such a household, like so many others. But I think that we really do need to emphasize the role of the fathers. And that's not to say that the mothers haven't done a wonderful job not doing, but we really do need to emphasize the role of the fathers. In fact, there was a study that was done on Black young men in the youth offending units or the juvenile system, and they themselves said the reasons why they got caught up in the gang culture was because of a lack of fatherlessness. That's what they themselves have said. So they've been able to identify some of the issues. And obviously that's not the only reason. We know about poverty, we know identity and all of the rest. But this is what they themselves said was a missing link for them. And, having an effective, strong father figure, especially when we're dealing in racist societies, color-coded societies that we're dealing with in the diaspora. So that's just A plea for men is what I'd like to put on. A plea for fathers. Oh, yes.
Well, thank you guys. Dr. Paul Mocombe, Dr. Carol Tomlin, Dr. Ericcson, Mapfumo, for this great conversation and for writing this important book. Again, guys, the book is available on the publisher's website, Cambridge Academic Publishing. Here's the copy, Dr. Carol. Raise it up so you can see it. And it will be available on Amazon.com and other online bookstores by next week. Again, Black Assimilationism and Neoliberal Globalization. Thank you so much. I hope you guys
Thank you, Lou. Thank you,
get
brother.
some
Thank you.
sleep now. Dr. Carol and Dr.
Thank
Mapfumo.
you.
Oh, it's still early for you.
I gotta water my plants, brother.
Okay,
Thank
guys.
you.
Take care.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay,
Well,
bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye.